And I've seen that a lot with, I don't know, like all the social media chatter. It's like there's a program that's going to give you financial freedom. And I know 15 people that have purchased it and it hasn't worked for a single one of them. And they all kind of feel like they, got duped, or they feel like the promise didn't live up to what the program actually was. But then no one talks about it because of their ego.
Right.
Because all of the content and everything that you're seeing online says, well, this program absolutely works if you do it the right way. And if you didn't find success, then like that's your fault, or you did something wrong, or you didn't follow what you were supposed to follow. And the reality is that's actually not the case a lot of times. Sometimes it was a bad program.
Welcome back to episode 3 of season 2 of Women Rewriting the Rules. How are you today, Ashley?
Doing so good. It is a nice, but I feel like kind of chilly day. So had a good walk on the beach this morning. Excited to be here now.
Beautiful. Me too.
Yes. So this topic, I feel like it's a really hot topic right now that lots of people are talking about. I'm excited for us to dive in and talk about things from a slightly different angle than the content listeners may be hearing when they're on social media or talking to friends.
Yeah. So I think both of us, we were talking the other day about how it seems to be a trend now and for the past few years that if you scroll TikTok or scroll Instagram, you get sort of bombarded by people talking about starting a side hustle, and a lot of influencers and business coaches talking about how easy it is to start a side hustle, and or that you should, sign up for their coaching program to easily start a side hustle and start to make $10K a month in the next,
that's always the minimum,
in the next 30 days or something like that, right? As long as you sign up for their coaching program. Or, things like that, where I feel like a lot of people and once you click on something like that, then of course you get bombarded with more and more content like that. And so I think today we just wanted to talk about what it really looks like to start a side hustle and what you should really consider before deciding to go for it, or before even, investing your money in somebody's course or program to help you go for it.
Absolutely. So I would say right now, it feels like there's a rule that exists that anyone can start a side hustle doing absolutely anything, and it will be really easy for them to make large sums of money quickly without having to spend really much, if any time at all, on that side hustle.
Or money. Yeah. And we are today rewriting that rule.
Yes.
And the rewritten rule is that women should be strategic and smart about how and why they decide to start a side hustle for extra income.
Absolutely. There's so many failed businesses, failed side hustles and dreams floating in the wind that people start and then they try it and maybe think that it should have been easier than it actually was for them, and they give up. And so, I'm really excited to dig into all of those things that you want to think about before you get started, so that you're actually going down the right path and that you're not investing time or money into something that's not actually going to serve you in the long run.
Yeah, or your hopes and dreams, and then to just become like deflated and crushed and lose momentum and lose enthusiasm, versus starting something that may have been more aligned, where you could have had more realistic expectations and actually known what it would have taken to be successful, so then you can actually set yourself up for success.
Absolutely. So there's so many entrepreneurs in the planet, but I think it's always important to come back to reality, right? So it's what are the facts and the numbers around entrepreneurship? So I believe right now only somewhere around 2% of women-owned businesses reach the mark of hitting seven figures, so making more than $1 million, that's less than 2%
Less than 2%
of women who start businesses. And then
and 90% of women never even cross the six-figure mark. So 98% of women never cross the seven-figure mark, and 90% of women never cross the six-figure mark. And that stat is honestly depressing. It's sad, and we should work to change it. And I think, that's why we were really excited to talk about this issue, because this shouldn't be the state of women business owners.
Agreed.
And so, listen through, because Ashley and I are going to talk about what we consider some of the most important aspects to making the decision, so we can start to change that stat. And if you do decide to start a business or start a side hustle, that you can be successful, and we can start expanding that rate so that it starts to become more than 2%, and it starts to become more than 98 or 90%.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what are some of the things that people might be hearing that aren't necessarily true, or common misconceptions. Are there any that come to mind for you?
I mean, yeah. I think one of the biggest things on social media these days is a emphasis on top line revenue. So people always talk about how much money they're making in their business. Like, I had an 80K month. Or first of all, somehow it's always said in months, which is my first red flag, by the way, because if you're an actual serious business owner, you don't talk about your income in terms of monthly revenue, because what about next month? What about the following month? Like you can't be so short-sighted.
Yeah.
And so that is, I think, a common misconception you see splashed over social media, where people are like, I had a 20K month last month. Sign up to my coaching program so you too can have 20K months. And the question there is twofold. One, okay, well, what happened the following month, or what happened for the entire year, right? But the original point I was making is that's top line revenue. That has not taken into consideration what your expenses were, and what all of your costs were, your cost of goods sold, your expenses, your time, your own time, any contractors that you paid. So what's actually the bottom line at the end of the day?
Absolutely. I think in so many of those conversations, people aren't being honest about the fact that maybe they had one really good month and they made $100,000 or $20,000, whatever that magical number is for them. But the month after that, they may have made zero, or they may have made 5,000. And it's a little bit disheartening. Like, I had a person that, sort of ran in my social circle who had her own business and was getting ready to launch a program where she would be teaching other people how to build their own side hustle. And so much of her promotion was around the fact that she had a really good month and made like $150,000 of revenue in 1 month. What I knew was that she made that $150,000. It drained her. She was completely burnt out. And then she actually wasn't able to replicate it. And so her attempt to bring in the same kind of dollars were based on the fact that she did it once. And then now she would sell people on the dream of being able to do it themselves. I guess that brings me to something that I think sometimes you'll see people using their past experience, or maybe even testimonials from other students who've taken their programs, as proof that this is possible and you can do it too. But you don't really know how authentic or genuine those testimonials are, and if they're a testimonial from someone who really found long-term success doing this thing, or if it was a quick win. I think a lot of times you can go back and look at testimonials and look at those individuals in their businesses. And if you look them up, you'll find that they've actually moved on to something completely different. And they're no longer even in the business that they claim to have started in this person's program that brought them financial freedom, maybe they're not even doing that anymore because it wasn't something that was going to be sustainable.
Well, I think that's a really good tip in terms of like, okay, so when you're, because, okay, if a listener is out there like thinking about, seeing all of these coaches' advertisements on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or whatever it is, Facebook seems like more of them.
So popular.
But it's really important that, to your point, like to look to investigate. Okay, so who is this person that's advertising this, right? Like, what are their actual credentials? Because, yeah, like you said, like they could have had a good month, but then nothing after that. And also, it's not like you're asking these coaches for their, for their like audited tax returns. So you really don't know what the truth of the matter is.
And also, there is no official, tried and true singular body of coaching credential, right? Like there are a couple of businesses that do.
There's like ICF.
Yeah.
For like, that's like life coaching. That's not business coaching.
Yeah. And there's nothing that's really, I feel like, properly regulated in that space where someone will say, oh, well, like, I'm a coach and I'm credentialed and I'm a business coach with credentials. It's like, most of that is going to be pretty subjective to like their life experience, what they've been able to accomplish. And as someone who's going to like invest money in a program, you really are responsible for like doing your own vetting and making sure that the things they're saying about their past accomplishments are accurate.
Yeah, I completely think that's like a huge takeaway. Don't believe the flash. And I think that goes into the second thing that I commonly see around the perception of somebody's brand. I guess that's what you're saying, the perception of somebody's brand versus the reality, right? Because it's just like Instagram versus reality, but the same thing applied to, well, what is their reality versus what's the splashy, pictures that they post of themselves in Bali, or
and don't forget Paris, the Eiffel Tower,
or a rented studio. Just here in LA, I was looking at doing a photo shoot for my music stuff, and there's on Peerspace a space that you can rent with a private jet and go take pictures of yourself in a private jet.
Yeah,
it's all likely fake, or not likely fake. It's very commonly fake.
Yeah, I think a good portion of it can be fake.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that it's a lot of times and very often encouraged. Like there was a woman, I won't say her name, but she has a very popular program that's around, like financial freedom and finding a way to like, become a coach or create a product and start your own business and be really successful. And a part of what she sells and the benefit and reason that people would sign up for her program is because she has like 4 trips, I think, that you then are invited to join her on. So you sign up for her program and then she's like, okay, like once a quarter, there's going to be an international meeting of everyone who signed up for my program. So then you have all of these people who just paid this woman a hell of a lot of money, like lots of money, so that they now have a reason to go to Paris and take a photo shoot or like go to Bali and have a photo shoot. So then when you're on the outside of that and you don't know that this person joined this program, you look at their social and you look at them saying that like they have found financial freedom and they're so successful. And you're like, well, they must be successful because there they are in front of, the Louvre, and there they are in front of Big Ben, and there they are like traveling all around the world.
And there we are in our studio apartment, like eating ramen, being like, well, that sounds great.
And so then you assume that like, oh yeah, there's totally something for me to learn, or they must have it figured out. And it's like, girl, what they figured out was how to pay someone $50,000 to have an excuse to travel around the world.
But also they paid for their own travel on top of that. Oops, that's my dress falls off.
This is not that kind of a podcast.
Yeah, they
OnlyFans, no side hustle.
Well, actually, that's a great segue to, we came, Ashley and I came up with a list of 7 things that you should consider right? When you're looking into, do I start a side hustle or do I not? And what are the factors that I want to consider there? What's important in my decision-making process? So speaking of OnlyFans, that was one of our things to consider because, okay, I'll short story. In early teens, I don't know the exact year, I, was still running my government contracting business, K4, but I was getting really into more of like self-discovery of like how I was relating in romantic relationships. And so I started working with a relationship coach, and then it was helping me a lot, like getting really clear on some of my patterns and some of my triggers and blind spots and those kinds of things. And then this coach came out like at the end of our coaching. She was like, by the way, I have launched a certification program where I'm teaching a small handful of my students to become relationship coaches themselves. And I thought, well, that would be fun. And she of course like pitched it hard with like, I felt it deeply that it's such a great need. Like, okay, we all need to become more aware of these patterns and how we relate, right? And so it would be like a good service that I would be providing to the world if I could really help people like that. And, the way she pitched me the business model, it made sense. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I'll sign up. So I signed up to like become a relationship coach. Now this is while I'm president of K4, this government contracting company.
Totally on the same page.
And yeah, exactly. The two identities just didn't really mesh. So we went through this, the certification. And then after, 6 months or however long it was like time to launch my business. And it was like, well, I got to put up a website, I guess, and then she was really encouraging everyone in the program to put their website up as their own personal brand, their own personal name. And I'm like, no, like how, I don't want my personal name, my personal brand associated with being a relationship coach. Like, meanwhile, I'm over here running, like TSA's public affairs center. And I'm like, and relationship coach? Like it just didn't jive.
Yeah.
And so it took me that long though. The point of the story is I kind of sabotaged. And so I stalled and procrastinated and sabotaged my own progress and like kind of, feel now like that was a little bit of a wasted effort on my part, Sumi, because you could have spent time doing something that you actually were going to launch and, create a side hustle or create a business out of instead of, going down a path around something that didn't align with your identity or your public identity, public brand at the time. So I think that's consideration number one. Like, you going to start an OnlyFans? Are you okay with having your name out there associated with that?
Well, that's true. There's so much content out now. I keep seeing it, and maybe this is just the side of the algorithm that I've like landed on. But I see so much content that's like, oh, like you can sell pictures of your feet. And then people are like, that would be amazing
That's
if
so
I
easy.
could, just sell pictures of my feet.
It's not porn.
Yeah.
So what's wrong
and I'm like, okay, but do you realize that you're then going to have to promote and market yourself as someone who's selling pictures of their feet? And even if you're only selling pictures of your feet, like people are going to want to know who the feet are attached to at some point. And so there may be requests for pictures of your face. And to your point, if you're not excited about it, or it feels like something that you would have to hide or something that you would be embarrassed for people to know about, like it's probably just not the right side hustle for you.
Worth it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like, real quick, another point on that. Like, I realized that it's very tempting because, as I'm like building a personal brand right now as an artist, it's like everything is kind of an open door, like Instagram subscriptions and, Patreon, all this. And I have, as a woman, putting myself out there, putting my public brand out there, like you get creepy men following you. And like a couple of these, I think, creepy men who are hopefully not listening to this podcast.
If they are, you're creepy, and you should know that you're creepy.
I've signed up for my Instagram subscription, but I'm not offering anything on that. And so I started thinking like, oh, well, what should I offer? And that would be really easy to like monetize that just by like doing something silly, like some like, shots from my photo shoot that I'm not releasing or something. And then I was like, literally, it crossed my mind. And then I was like, wait, no. Like the energetic, and here's the point, the energetic outlay of like catering to an audience, like for example, creepy men, would just be such a drain and like not the energy that I want in my life.
For you.
For me. Oh, for me. Right.
Yeah.
And to each their own. But like for me, I realized like that's not aligned with like the energetics that I want around me. Right. So I think that was my point with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Which takes us to the second point, which is really understanding if the side hustle idea you have is long-term or short-term. Are you talking about potentially starting something that 10, 20 years from now could still be going as a side hustle or potentially grow into a full-time business and still be beneficial to you? Or are you thinking of a side hustle as something that, you know, maybe it's good for 6 months, maybe it's good for a year, and then it's going to feel disposable or be something that you would be really tired of? Which makes me think of one of my cousins. She's like in her early 20s, and we were chatting the other day because she's like, Ashley, like everything is so expensive these days. You know, like she has a job, but she's right out of college, and she's like, I feel like I just need to have like something extra on the side. And I was like, okay, like what are you thinking about doing? And she was like, well, you know, like I really like books, and so I'm thinking about maybe like reading audiobooks. And I was like, okay, that's a really good idea. Could potentially be something that, you know, would help you bring in extra cash. But do you think 6 months from now or like a year from now, you're going to want to spend 10, 12, however many hours it takes a week to record these books and make that cash? And she's like, oh, like actually maybe not. And I'm like, yeah, but if you wrote books and then put them up, you know, for sale on Amazon, okay, you're still in that same arena of like publishing and books, but now you're thinking about your side hustle in a way that like you write that book today, it could still be bringing in passive, mostly passive income for you in a decade without you having to do any extra work.
I love that. And I think the key there is like, does your idea have leverage? So is it solely tied to you trading your time for dollars, or does it have leverage? Like what you said, you write that book once, you know, and then you stick it up there on a store, and then it continues if you have an audience and if you grow an audience and if you put some money toward marketing it and time toward marketing it, like it is something that could be an asset that continues to pay you over the long run, and you've only spent one portion of time working on it.
Absolutely.
And like, so I think there's a big difference between a side hustle, like being your, you know, local like dog walker or something like that, which is completely fine and legit, or like driving Lyft or, you know, something like that, which is a side hustle that you're trading your own time for dollars for that time spent, versus creating something with leverage, which means it can continue to pay you for many months and years to come after you've done it once.
Totally. And I used to not, I don't know, there was a point in time where I would think about creating different things. I've had a million side hustles that have failed. That's why I can come here and give advice on like
and likewise
how to be more thoughtful about it. But there was a point when I thought about creating like this specific digital product, and I'm like, oh, you know, but like I would create it and then I would have to like keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it for it to have any value. Fast forward to a couple of months ago, I decided to get back into like a really heavy meditation practice again, because I used to meditate like daily, and then I saw someone who told me that I shouldn't, and so I stopped, and I was like, I'm going to get back to like my meditation. And the first thing that came to mind was this Oprah Winfrey, Deepak Chopra meditation series, like 21 day, that I bought, I think in like 2012. You know, like I bought it so long ago.
Yeah, that was a long. I remember when that came out. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, I wonder if I still have access to that, because I just feel like that would be something familiar that would help me get back into the flow. And so I totally was able to like go to my email, you know, and find it and pull it up, and it's like it's definitely changed. The branding has changed. The platform has changed.
Yeah.
but
But it's still there.
still there and still bringing value to so many people. And so it's like thinking about your side hustle from that perspective as well of like long-term impact, I think can be helpful.
I love that. And like specifically dialing into kind of what we were talking about earlier around, being a coach and like coaches coaching you to start a business or to start a side hustle. Like I think a really common idea that's thrown out in those communities is like starting a digital course, basically teaching something that you're an expert in, right? Or a lot of times it'll be like a membership where like people pay some nominal fee every month to get something from you, to get something from your expertise in the community that you build, right? And so even with that, it's like figuring out, okay, well, one of them will take your ongoing time, so it's not necessarily passive, right? You have to what I mean is for the membership, you have to show up however many times, you've promised the people that you would show up, maybe weekly, maybe, every other week, at least usually once a month, and offer your time to them, right? Versus a digital course, maybe it's on an evergreen funnel, even better for the passive part of it is just totally passive. You're not actually showing up anymore once you create it once and stick it on an evergreen funnel. However, so that's passive versus active. But I think what we want to talk about next is, well, how do you actually make money? So that's a great idea. Like, sure, you could have a great idea for a digital product that might be passive and not take much of your time. But then like if it doesn't sell, it's not making you any money. So now you've wasted.
Still have to promote it.
You still have to promote it. And sort of like the difference between having a low-priced product, digital course on an evergreen funnel, you need tons of people to buy that product. Like say that product is priced at $299 or $150 or $99. Like who knows what it is, right? Yeah. Have you done the math and figured out how many people you'd need to buy that product, not just for month one, but every single month in order to make you an income that you would be happy about?
Yeah. And what's the investment of that to sort of keep that funnel going, keep the sales going, and then also to get started? Because back to misconceptions, like starting a side hustle is free or it's cheap and like it's not going to take that much investment on the front end. Reality is that you're going to have to invest something. You're going to invest your own time figuring things out and potentially like failing and then making adjustments and failing and making adjustments and failing and making adjustments. If you're doing anything digital, probably going to have to invest in some form of software, like people that create courses or even sell, like digital goods. Are you selling those digital goods on Etsy? Because there's a small cost associated with that. If you're selling an online course, are you putting it into a platform like Teachable? Again, there's a monthly cost associated with that. You can go the free route, but they've gotten real slick, and the free route's only going to get you so far in terms of feature and functionality that would make your course like good, And so you really do have to think before you get started, do I have a budget? Do I have dollars? And also realistically, how much time do I even have outside of the obligations that are already in my life, like work or volunteering or family, whatever that might look like for you, the extracurricular activities you like to do on a regular basis? Are you going to be willing to shift some of those things around and focus on your side hustle for some amount of time, at least until you get it off the ground? And then if you have created something that's super passive, maybe you don't have to spend that much time on it. But if it's not that passive, you're going to have to keep allocating that time to that side hustle.
And generally, it's a trade-off. Like if you created something that's super passive, you're probably going to need a lot of money to put behind it to market it to an audience so you get enough customers that make it worth your while, right? Yeah. And if you don't have a lot of money, then you got to put your time in and actually, so it's kind of like, it's a trade-off. Like if you don't have a lot of money, you have to ask yourself, do you have the time? And if you don't have the time, do you have the money? But if you've got neither of those things, like you genuinely have to figure out like why even start something and kind of get excited about it, and worse, sign up for some coach's program who promises you these results, right? For then you to realize after 3 months down the road that, well, you don't really have the time and you don't really have the money. And now you've actually spent more money on this program that did you no good. And now you're like back to square zero. So I think that we wanted to underline that it's like money, time, energy, other resources. Are you doing a business plan? Like one of the things that I think is completely missing from this conversation on Facebook and these business coaches conversations is like, what is your business plan? Like, what are all of your upfront costs, startup costs, right? Mm-hmm. What is your pipeline of sales look like? How are you going to create that pipeline? I.e., how much money do you need to put behind ads? How much money do you need to put behind whatever you're doing? Are you going to conferences? Are you pitching yourselves on podcasts? Sometimes even pitching yourselves on podcasts now, by the way, like you have to pay $10,000 to be somebody's guest.
Okay. This is kind of an aside, but I find it fascinating. I had a friend who she had a very successful podcast. She had very impressive guests and people that you're like, oh my gosh, like this person's going to be on there. That's amazing. And then I learned on the back end that she was actually paying a lot of those people to be on her podcast in terms of like buying their book. So when they would have like a new book that was coming out and they're like trying to get New York Times bestseller, which I don't think the Times allows us anymore. I think they've like discontinued this practice, but they'd say, hey, yeah, like you want me to be on your podcast? Okay, cool. Like that's going to be 10,000 books that you have to purchase. And so then she would have all of these boxes of these people's books. But to that point being, people are like, oh, well, she started a podcast and that's going to be like a great source of income for her. And I'm like, actually, she's spending like a lot of money, like without having corporate sponsors or anything like that, just to get certain types of people on her podcast so that she could build a brand perception. And she was a person who was selling online courses, of course, to then sell her online course to someone who was looking for financial freedom and hoping that because of the perception she had, she would be...
That's just so sad.
Know?
But I'm so glad you're bringing this up because I think we just want to underlines the point that there's a lot of fakery out there. Is that a word? Like there's a lot of fakery out there.
Yeah.
And we don't want you guys to I don't know, think that it like sounds so appealing and like fall for something that's not going to do you any good.
Yeah. And I think too, it's like just being honest with yourself. Like entrepreneurship requires a certain level of just closeness with yourself and also ability to be really honest with yourself, because there have been things that I've started and then I realized I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah. Like, okay, I've been at this for 6 months or I've been at this for a year and it's not going in the direction that I thought it was going to go in. I've sank, $60,000 into trying to make this work. It's not working. It's going to completely like break my ego to have to backtrack and no longer have my identity associated with this or have my identity associated with this failing. But I have to be honest with myself that that's what I need to do right now, even if it doesn't feel good and I'm worried about what other people will think. This side hustle isn't hustling the way that it needs to. Like the side hustle hustled me. And so now I need to like remove myself, from the scenario. And if you can't have those kinds of conversations with yourself, you're going to struggle.
Yeah. And I think I really love that you said that too, because that's the total, like, I think it's called like the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like we think that, okay, so in that situation, you've sunk $50,000, $60,000 of your hard-earned money that you've saved for years and years, I'm imagining, like into something. You think like, well, now I'm already in it. Like now I'm already in this deep. I got to keep going, right? But actually what you're sharing there is like something that takes a lot of courage in terms of like getting real with yourself and saying, well, you know what? Like, yeah, I sunk this much money into it, but I don't want to do it anymore. And like, it's not going the way I wanted it to. And it's not going to go the way that I want it to. So pulling the plug now is better than continuing, along those lines, because you're so afraid of the cost you've already sunk into that.
Absolutely.
Which is a common mistake that a lot of us make. We refuse to quit when we refuse to quit, and we just keep going on something that's not doing us any good.
Yeah. Well, and I think the ego portion of that as well. And I've seen that a lot with, I don't know, like all the social media chatter. It's like there's a program that's going to give you financial freedom, and I know 15 people that have purchased it, and it hasn't worked for a single one of them. And they all kind of feel like they, got duped, or they feel like, the promise didn't live up to what the program actually was. But then no one talks about it because of their ego.
Right.
Because all of the content and everything that you're seeing online says, well, this program absolutely works if you do it the right way. And if you didn't find success, then like, that's your fault, or you did something wrong, or you didn't follow what you were supposed to follow. And the reality is that's actually not the case a lot of times. Sometimes it was a bad program. Sometimes it just wasn't the program for those specific individuals, or it wasn't aligned with what they were trying to accomplish. And it's like, there just has to be room, I think, to have those conversations openly and honestly.
Love it.
If you're going to start a successful side hustle.
Yes. Okay. So should we wrap it up there?
Yeah. Okay. So if you had to summarize, I guess, what to avoid in starting your own side hustle in 30 seconds, what would you say?
So my summary of this episode is like a couple things. One, you got to be really realistic about what you decide to do, because we want to change the stat so that it's more than 2% of women who cross the 7-figure mark, and it's more than 10% of women who cross the 6-figure mark. Like, that's a depressing statistic. And so if you're going to start a business, like the very first step, or side hustle is still a business. The very first step is to consider what kind of time do you have, what kind of money do you have, what kind of other resources do you have, and write a business plan. And don't fall for all the flashy stuff on social media that might make it seem so easy. Okay. And if you were to sum it up in 30 seconds, what would it be?
I would say practice really strong discernment. Like, don't be afraid to ask uncomfortable questions, either to the mentor that you're potentially thinking about working with, or to other people who maybe already have a side hustle going in that space. Like, I think success in side hustling comes from having really raw, honest conversations, seeking those out, and not just being afraid to ask the real questions, have the hard talks about the reality of what it's going to be in that side hustle. And then also just to really know yourself. Like, if you know you're the type of person that doesn't stick to anything, take that into consideration. If you're the type of person who knows you get bored really easily, take all of those character traits and personality traits that you know about yourself and like bake that into the kind of side hustle that you're going to start. That it can be something that benefits you long term.
Love it. Awesome. Thank you guys for listening. Hope it helped.
All right. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye.